Kubernetes for Humans.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Kubernetes for Human podcast. Today, with me at the show, we have Gwen Shapira. Gwen, super happy to have you here.
I'm super happy to be here. And I love the podcast name, Kubernetes for Humans, kind of hints at the rest of the Kubernetes content out there.
Yeah, I think like Kubernetes in general is like meant for very smart people sometimes when it comes to the content itself. Like, first of all, introduce yourself, and then let's deep dive a bit into the Kubernetes world.
Yeah, for sure. Hi, I'm Gwen. Right now I'm co-founder of a company called Nile, where we are building a platform and mostly a database for other people who are going to build software as a service products. And the reason we decided to do it is based on, I think it's very often the case, on our experience in our previous company, where we took Apache Kafka and had to turn it into software as a service. And we discovered all the different ways in which this was way harder than it should have been. And obviously, there was a lot of Kubernetes involved when you take open source project and try to provide it as a service to the world. That was also where I first learned about Kubernetes. Before that, I was actually very much in the very large databases running in a data center for a very large company. I worked on Hadoop, and before that, MySQL and Oracle, and all kinds of how do we wrangle large data for large organizations.
Was your expertise like really building the database itself, or more around the wrapping? Like, did you write the MySQL algorithms, or?
I didn't write the MySQL algorithms. I did fix MySQL bugs once or twice, but yeah, it was mostly around the usage of it and the tooling around it. Today, you may call it platform engineering. There's all those new names for that. A lot of it was architectural, like just data modeling, what is the right way to do layout, scaling out versus scaling up, these kinds of problems that it turns out they're evergreen.
No, it makes total sense. So, like, I always like to ask my guests, like, how did you go into software? Like, why software? Is it a passion from school, army, something else?
It was a bit of a passion in school. I mean, I like engineering and I liked building things, and I was fortunate enough to have a computer at home from a relatively young age. I had a neighbor who was a computer science professor at the Hebrew University. He gave me my first programming book when I think I was like 10 years old. I learned a bit of, I think it was Logo back then, when you have the turtle walking around the screen. But I have to say that it was not my dream growing up to be a software developer at all. What actually happened was that I failed to get accepted into medical school after trying pretty hard, just very selective programs. And so I was like, okay, I need a plan B. And, I have Jewish parents. So it's like, okay, you have to be a doctor. If that doesn't work, you have to be a lawyer. And if that doesn't work, what else gets paid well, I guess, and is not one would meet to our friends.
It's like a good thing in a Jewish home as well, right? Like my father is a lawyer, so I'm in the stereotype, but like an engineer, like his brother is an engineer, right? Like that was it's like one lawyer, one engineer, one doctor. That's the dream.
Yeah, I think I don't remember having like lawyers and doctors were the big deal. I don't remember engineering being a big deal growing up. But yeah, my younger brother is a lawyer. So yeah. And my dad is a doctor, in case it wasn't obvious. So yeah, it is kind of, so yeah, I guess it was either being a lawyer or being an engineer, and engineering is way better.
No, like my little sister is like now becoming a doctor, and I always try to tell her that it's not too far, and she can always regret. And I'll find her no data engineers, but she really liked the medical stuff. Okay, so you worked in a couple of different companies. When and why did you start working on Kubernetes? Like what company were you first introduced, and what was the bit of the context around Kubernetes?
Yeah, so I joined Confluent back when they were very small, and there was only on-prem product.
What is like relatively small is like first?
I was engineer number 13, and they hired engineers number 11, 12, and 13 on the same day. So when I joined, the company just increased its size by 25%. I was extremely early. But there was already a product because Apache Kafka, and it was really a matter of helping different companies use it, building an ecosystem around it, things like that. I think, I don't remember how long later, but months later, Confluent very early, like we need to have cloud. We need to have a cloud solution. We cannot just be a company that is only on-prem. This is not the future. And the people we hired around it, well, first of all, we got the person who is currently my co-founder, but we also got two really smart engineers, really brilliant, who their startup just folded. And what they did in that startup was basically Kafka on Kubernetes with a bunch of ETL tools for large financial institutes. Basically, we met when I was trying to sell to maybe E-Trade, and they were in the same room also trying to sell to E-Trade, kind of thing. So when the startup they decided to shut it down, we were like, just come and join us. And they already brought the Kubernetes experience with them. And this was incredibly early, and exactly at the time where running a stateful service in Kubernetes was considered insane. But at Confluent, we believed in not solving for the past. We wanted to solve for the future. We easily could have written a bunch of Ansible scripts or whatever was popular at the time and was a safer bet, but you don't do a startup to do the safer bet, right? So we looked at them like they're insane, and we said, are you guys sure? And they said, oh yeah, trust us on this one. It will get better. And we did.
And it did. So just so like everyone will have the context, right? Like Confluence is the creator of Kafka, right? Like they are like the ones that took it from LinkedIn, right? And like open source it and made it like big. And this is like the commercial product, same as like Elastic and Elasticsearch, for example. So when you started your Kubernetes cluster, the goal was to host Kafka for other users as a service, or was it more for like internal usage? What was that?
The goal was always 100% host it for other people. Later, we took what we wrote there, like our operator, and we said, hey, a lot of people want to run Kafka on Kubernetes. We solved all those hard problems. Let's give this operator as part of the Confluent offering for on-prem. But that definitely came it came later, for sure.
Okay. That makes total sense. So share a bit, if you don't mind, around maybe like, I think both in Confluence, like you are very small. Like I wanted to ask you about platform engineering and building something for other people. So I'll be happy to hear your take. In Confluence, was there a platform team? Were you... Okay, so share with me.
Absolutely. So from day zero of the cloud, there was a platform team. Like first it was like these two people that we opportunistically hired because we randomly met. And they said, you guys need to, we're going to run it on Kubernetes. Well, the moment you tell anyone in your company you're going to run your product on Kubernetes, you are now the platform team, right? I know Kafka. I'm Kafka engineer. My team writes Kafka code. And if you're going to tell us, hey, from now on, you need to deploy it on Kubernetes, we're like, okay, we know how to package Docker containers. What's next? What do we do next, right? And at the beginning, it was very much a process of working closely, discovering things together. And the tools in the beginning were very manual. It was like, okay, here's how you write a Terraform script. Just copy this thing I wrote and change the values there for the new customer kind of stuff. And, you start somewhere. And then over time, they're good engineers. We ended up with Kubernetes as a service, which gave us some APIs that we can integrate with. They taught us how to integrate well with the operator. So we learned how to write the correct APIs in our product the operator can use. It started working as a platform in the ways that we negotiated contracts. This is how the interface between your application and the platform is going to be. And so, yeah, I started from 2 people. I think the first year it grew to maybe 8. And then by the time I left, it was probably more than half of engineering. I don't know, 200, 300 people. It wasn't just the Kubernetes parts, although the Kubernetes parts were big parts of it. But also things like authentication, permissions, billing was a large part of it. But even if we just take the platform on top of Kubernetes, it was, I don't know, 50 people for sure, maybe more.
Okay, like sharing, it sounds like super interesting. Also, like the growth rate is just crazy, and so maybe like share a bit about maybe like challenges that you had on those early days. Like, what was the most difficult thing? Was it to discuss API or something else? Like, I let you share like biggest challenges or any challenges that you may have encountered.
Yeah, I think when we first started and things were small, the biggest challenges were technical and mostly around Kubernetes behavior being surprising, not being a good match for what we need. There's just a lot of incidents that came out of we misunderstood, because Kubernetes, it always makes stuff look easy, right? You have the YAML for the deployment, you change just one line, you save it, you do apply, and things should magically reconcile. This is the big promise of Kubernetes and what we really believed in. What took us a long time to learn is we're not always okay with how it's going to reconcile things. If you're going to make, like, there were situations where small change actually caused the entire network of an entire cluster to restart. We did not expect it. We didn't know it's going to happen. We didn't always know when will network disappear. It was all around networking. I think for us, this was like the hardest part.
Yeah.
When will the network disappear when you restart a machine? Kafka, it turned out, as a process of learning, Kafka was specific about when does it have network access, when are requests allowed to get routed. And if Kafka starts telling clients, hey, go connect to that machine, but Kubernetes doesn't think this machine is up yet and not allow traffic to that machine, you're going to have downtime. And Kubernetes is not very nice about letting you synchronize things. So having to synchronize when Kafka believes that the machine is available and when Kubernetes believes the machine is available was one of the biggest challenges, to be honest. Like, just taking two very different models of network and figuring out how to align it. people were very happy when we did it, like in the Kafka community, because it was very much seen as we're making Kafka cloud native. And at some point, it became the name of my team. We're the cloud native Kafka. We're looking at all the places where we are making the way Kafka expects the world to behave, match the way Kubernetes actually behaves. And okay, I'm okay with it. Everyone loves cloud native. I'm going to call it cloud native Kafka. But I always felt it was a bit misleading because it's not that Kafka was not cloud native. It's just that it was not Kubernetes native. Kubernetes did things in a certain way, and we had to adapt to it. Did it actually make Kafka better than it was before? I don't know. People seem to think it is.
No, I think, like most companies and even most of our customers don't run stateful things inside Kubernetes. I think it's like one of the biggest taboos in Kubernetes, even now. And you have like your own, like all of the, basically of the product, right? Like the cloud native team build around having state in Kubernetes. So, and like it was a while ago, right? And still like almost no customers run like a full state inside Kubernetes. So I wonder, like, what did you learn, or is state in Kubernetes going to be the next big thing? Is it already the big thing? Like, give me like your take around state in Kubernetes.
It's interesting. I didn't know it's still a taboo, to be honest. Like, I knew that when we started, it was a no-go. And then Kubernetes got better, right? A lot of things were just improved because there was this demand to run stateful workloads. Realistically speaking, you have a stateful workload. What am I supposed to do with it, right? Like, now that we know about Kubernetes, we know about the way it works, we know how it sees the world, we actually like it, right? I like the reconciliation loop. I like the way Kubernetes solves this very difficult problem of managing infrastructure. I want it for my stateful sets. I don't want to go back to writing my own bash scripts. I'm not going back there, right? Not gonna happen. So I think, and I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one who feels that way. So when the demand is there, companies and open source projects step up to meet the demand. Now, I wish companies like Google invested more time in making Kubernetes better for stateful and less time in telling us not to do it. But, it is what it is. And I think as a community, it ended up doing the right thing.
I think it's interesting. Like, for me, like, first of all, it makes total sense that if you're running all of your application, to run the state part also inside of Kubernetes, because it is part of your application. I will say, on like cloud providers, on the other hand, don't really have a good incentive because it will make their unique IP less dominant. Like, people won't use AWS RDS, they will use Kubernetes. But like, I'm not like, in Commodore, we run only caches on AWS, on like Kubernetes. We don't have our main DB on Kubernetes. And that is because I always felt that like Kubernetes not claim to fame, but one of the early like warning signs was you should treat your like application as cattle, not as beloved pet, right? And I really love my DB, like that.
So like my database is actually my pet. I can see it. Yeah, you have to take care of it.
Because like someone decided to terminate this node or whatever. Like, I want the stability, I want the persistence. So how do you overcome the challenges, or like between like those two? Like, the core of Kubernetes that says I can like kill any pod at any given time, and you should be ready for that. And like managing the full-blown Kafka cluster. Is it a question of replication or like what?
I think you made a really good point here that I would actually like to focus on, because the way you said my database is a pet, I care about it, I feed it. I cannot put it on Kubernetes where I know it's going to get treated like cattle. This is 100% true. And I think once you have something that takes this care and feeding, basically the two choices are, I want to take good care of it. It's my database. I love it. I want to take good care of it. And then what are the tools I have to take the best care of it possible? And it may be Kubernetes. And then, yes, it is more work. I'm not saying that running anything on stateful on Kubernetes is actually easy and trivial. There will be learning curve, but running the database in the first place probably involves not a tiny learning curve either. And you already, if you're running the database yourself, you have the backup scripts and you have replication and you have failover and you have some tuning and you already invested a lot. I wouldn't say that moving to Kubernetes is going to be double the investment. It may some parts of the investment and may increase other parts. It's kind of, you have to look at it pros cons. I think today I would run on Kubernetes, but it's not trivial. The other option is to say, hey, yeah, take care of feeding of a database is hard, and I actually don't want it. I don't want this pet. I don't want this puppy. I want my neighbor to have this puppy and 2 days in the afternoon go and pet it a bit. And that's exactly what cloud providers do. You would go to AWS and tell them, I'm willing to pay the RDS, which are, a bit more expensive than running it yourself. I'm willing to pay the highly exorbitant Aurora fees, because it brings me the value of I don't need to do the pet care and feeding, and I never really wanted this pet in my house anyway. It was a stray cat, and why did it end up here, and why am I feeding it?
Yeah, the ideal was always serverless, right? And I think you can relate to that, right? But the ideal was never, I don't want to care about the resources or the machines or the database, just serverless me, everything, right? And make it work. If I could, we're using, for example, AWS RDS, Postgres 15, I want to say, whatever. And I'm quite happy with that. But, sometimes the database do have hiccups, even AWS RDS. So, if someone could have offered me the best database ever in a reasonable price that we never had any downtime or problems, I would pay the money, right? So why or what should they do, basically, right?
Yeah, this is something that is always fascinating to me. And it was fascinating to me from day zero of moving to the cloud. So back when I managed databases and later Hadoop for large companies, and cloud started being a thing. I talked to a lot of companies I worked with, when are you guys moving to the cloud? And a big part of it was the storage part. I'm running my data system. It's obviously very storage sensitive. If I move it to the cloud, I have no control over the storage. What if it has hiccups, as you say? What if it's slow? And I always found it a bit funny because those companies on-prem, they have serious storage issues. They were running on those large storage arrays, and the number of times that Hadoop broke down at 3 a.m. every single day because someone else using the same storage array was taking a large data backup of an Oracle database sitting just next to it, and it took over all the resources of this big storage array. It happened all the time. It was not a rare, and then you have to start negotiating. How do I back up a database that is sitting on the same array? How do we segregate? So there will be problems. The database will have problems. If you are better at running this than the cloud storage provider, if you are actually better at running Postgres than AWS is at running Postgres, kudos. Keep on doing it. Consider selling it as a service. But I don't know that it's true for a lot of companies, to be honest.
No, no, I can be good at I don't know, managing Postgres, but I really don't want to be that road.
I think it's a lot of times it's also the same for Kubernetes, right? I mean, at Confluent, we ran Kubernetes ourselves. We had good experts, but I think even there at some point we were like, well, let's take a look at what the cloud managed Kubernetes has to offer. And I don't even remember how it ended up. I think we did move to it at some point. I'm not 100% sure. But I mean, it's a legit thing to check. What am I paying for? What am I getting as a result? The interesting part is if you're a platform team for a company, what is your obligation to the application team? Because I would say that, as you said, the alternative of being serverless is almost sets a bar for the platform team. If me as an application owner could get better service by going to a vendor, you're not maybe doing a great job as my platform team.
I think that is completely true. That is completely true. Like platform team is like there's always like most of the time you can choose not to use them, right? Like in a lot of companies, and there's always like a healthy competition of like what the platform team provides versus everything else, basically, right?
Yeah.
So maybe share a bit about your startup. Like, how does it relate to everything that we just talked about, or it doesn't really? But I think it does. So maybe share a bit about like.
Yeah, it relates a lot in the sense that we've been inspired by both Kubernetes and a lot of the ideals that evolved around it of really how platforms should behave and the expectations that a platform will give you APIs, they will reconcile things, but that the expectation today is that platforms are going to be very self-healing, that the information that will provide developers will allow developers to fix things when they're broken on the developer side, but they will also hide problems that the developer cannot fix. So there were a lot of things around the experiences that evolved around both platform thinking these days, and I think, and serverless experiences that cloud providers give. And what Kubernetes really, the way it influenced the world to think about self-healing, about reconciliation loops, about, I think, the people who really bought into Kubernetes, and I'm happy to say that it is an increasing number of companies, they are willing to let go of a lot of control. I would say this is my one big lesson out of Kubernetes, is that when you're using a platform, it's actually better to try not to micromanage the platform. I had a bad time on Kubernetes when I was like, this is exactly how I want to place all my services that I think is optimal. That was really bad. Once you're like, okay, here are some constraints that are actually really, really important to me that Kubernetes cannot know about. But as long as those constraints are respected, I'm good with it doing whatever the hell it wants. I trust it to do the right thing for me. I thought it was better for me and ended up with actually a better, more stable, more reliable architecture. It turned out that a lot of the time Kubernetes is smarter than me about a lot of those things. So I think a lot of people learned that. And I think a lot of developers are now willing to let go of control and trust the platform to manage some details that maybe they shouldn't have ever cared about, but they were forced to care about in the past, kind of thing. At least that's
Well, I think like the key word here is really like the trust, right? Like once you have the trust, once I know that Kubernetes is reliable enough to do networking, to do storage and so on, like it's much easier for me to say, okay, I'm going to move my company to use it. So I think like that's really the key here. So to conclude, like I always like to ask my guests for a prediction. Like where is Kubernetes headed? Like 3 years from now, we're going to check all of the different episodes, but what is going to happen in the ecosystem?
Oh man, I feel like I'm going to make the prediction that everyone is making and that I've been waiting for it to come true for the last 3 years. Maybe in the next 3 years it will finally happen. We always keep saying that Kubernetes is a platform for platforms, right? And you're going to have a lot of stuff getting built on top so you can ignore Kubernetes. And that large companies will have a platform team and then the application teams can ignore Kubernetes. So far, I haven't had the best luck in ignoring Kubernetes. But who knows? Maybe in 3 years, someone who starts a new company can build on Kubernetes without knowing all the details that we were kind of forced to learn about how every bit of networking works.
Okay, sounds good. Any last words?
Keep building cool stuff. My guess is that everyone listening is a developer. We're all building things. Let's build really awesome products. Let's make it. Let's build something amazing.
I couldn't agree more. So, Gwen, it was really a pleasure having you on the show, and best of luck with your startup as well.
Thank you, and good luck to you.